Hey, it's Dawn from Dawn's Dirt. Dirt can mean gardening, dirt can mean homesteading, dirt can mean chickens, dirt can mean politics, and dirt can mean religion. And today we will talk about probably some of all of the above. In this episode, I'd like to talk about the ideologies in farming and the ideologies in homesteading. And so people always feel like they've got all the right answers. It should be this and it should be that, and farmers should do this and farmers should do that, and homesteaders should do this and homesteaders should do that. And this is what the world needs, and this is what climate change needs, and this is what the food system needs, and this is what everyone's got all these ideological answers. And you know what? I'm here today to say probably none of them are all wrong, and probably none of them are all right. And so, yeah, we'll chat about the ideologies in farming and the ideologies in homesteading. And so here we go. I want you to think back, if you've not had children yet, you might not quite understand it, but if you've had children, before you had your children, did you have all of the answers? When I have kids, my babies will always do this, and my babies will always do that, and my kids will never do this, and my kids will always do that, and you had all of the right answers. Because I know I sure did. Before I had my 3 kids, and especially before my first, I knew exactly how I was going to raise that child and raise my children. And let me tell you, I am 18, 16, and 14 years later. And yeah, it's like getting into a roller coaster, kind of buckling yourself in and holding on for the ride, because my ideologies had to fly out the window. Yeah, 18 years ago when I had the baby. And when people have babies now, and when I see a first time mom, I just tell, or someone pregnant, I always just say, is this your first baby? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, you need to take all the advice in, take everything in, and don't throw it all out. Even what grandma says, you might think she's crazy now, but you never know what's going to work at 2:00 in the morning. And there's so much truth to that. When it comes to ideologies in farming and ideologies in agriculture and ideologies in our food, really, unless you've been a farmer, and about 1% to 3% of our population right now are farmers. I was one. Unfortunately, I sold my farm. Unless you've put on the bootstraps of a farmer, you can take your ideologies and kind of almost throw them out the window, because, it's just not reality. Now, you as a consumer have a lot of power because you vote with your dollars. But as far as ideologies in farming goes, you never know what's going to work, when the cows are calving and there's a big problem or a big snowstorm or a big hailstorm, or on my farm, I had a potential tornado almost hit it, and hail, nothing doesn't ever always go right. And sometimes you got to do what you got to do on a farm. And so, yeah, we'll just chat about that. So the first thing I want to talk about is conventional farming, and then we'll get into organics and permaculture and all those different kinds of agriculture. When it comes to conventional agriculture, so let's think of our regular chicken farmers, our regular dairy farmers, our regular grain farmers, our regular beef farmers. I'm here today to say, 99% of them are just doing what they've got to do. They're doing what they've learned. They're doing what has been taught to them. They're doing what they got to do to make their farms work. Roundup is a big controversial issue. So everyone is talking about glyphosate, glyphosate, glyphosate. And I'm here today to tell you that, in many, many cases, if a farmer didn't use Roundup in his crop rotation at all, ever, he might not have a crop. He wouldn't have good crop production, which means he wouldn't have a farm left. Farmers are only doing what they have to do to make the bills meet on their farm. And so it's a myth to say that farmers are just spraying the shit out of their crops just for the sake of spraying it. So if you're a farmer listening today, weigh in on the subject, or I'd even love to have you on the show, because let's chat about the myths in agriculture. And I can tell you from rubbing shoulders with farmers that they do not even want to spray. I mean, hey, if they could have a crop and they didn't ever have to spray again, that would be a better day on their pocketbook. But the trick is, how much production will they sacrifice if they don't spray? And if they sacrifice production, how much money will they get for their crops if they don't spray? And so, I'm not here to ever fault a farmer for doing what he needs to do on his farm. For the small family farm. And by small family farm, I'm talking thousands of acres of cropland and, several hundred cows. That's a small family farm here in Canada. And so, yeah, we need to get past these ideologies. And when it comes to this whole climate change thing, It's the ideologies around it. So they always say maybe we should use less fertilizer. Well, if you use less fertilizer, you might not get the crop production that you need. If you don't get the crop production you need, you're not going to pay your bills. If you're not going to pay your bills, there goes the family farm. And what we're seeing is the farms need to get bigger and bigger and bigger in order to make ends meet. Now, I'll bring this back to my farm. So I understand all farmers. I get all farmers. If you're a beef farmer, chicken farmer, dairy farmer, pig farmer, any kind of farmer, I support you. Even if you're not organic and even if you're doing it the conventional way, no farmers, no food, and I believe in you. Yeah, so we still need to protect you. So let's bring this back to my farm. So on my farm, I grew without pesticide unless certified organic product was used. I was able to do that because it's what my customers wanted. And so I was a hydroponic system. So I used fertilizer. I gave my plants food. Fertilizer is food. And then my wastewater actually got collected and it got put onto my field crops. And so people ask me all the time, fertilizer, is it bad or is it scary? And to be brutally honest with you, I think it's this whole climate activism that is the push behind fertilizer being bad. Fertilizer is not actually that bad. Fertilizer is nutrients. So you can have organic fertilizer, which is compost. And what that is nutrients just broken down that much further. Calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, nitrogen, all the things that plants need to grow. So whether you get it from compost or, doing green manure back onto your soil, which is great. Soil health is extremely important. Whether you're a big farmer or a little farmer, it doesn't matter. Soil health is important. Yeah. So fertilizer is just nutrients. Did you eat today? Because I sure did. And I need nutrients to grow. Plants need nutrients to grow. So I get a little less worked up over fertilizer. Now, herbicide on my farm would kill absolutely everything. So that really wasn't an option on my farm. And fungicide and insecticide, I use the same methods as organic farmers would. And so, yeah, people who ate organic ate my produce. In some ways, I always actually joked that my produce was better than organic because I sent the water sample away and I fed my plants exactly what they needed to grow. And that's what my plants got. And that's the nutrients that were in my food. And I had some pretty good food on my farm. Now, I always had people to ask me, why don't you grow organic? The truth is, I was scared to. I know of an organic farmer down in southern Alberta in a greenhouse, and he's an amazing farmer. He's a great farmer. He grew his cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers in soil. He remedied his soil with organic fertilizers or organic feeds of however he did it. He used the same methods as me. He would use good bugs to eat the bad bugs, and so I did that as well. So as far as bug control goes, we did the same things. But yeah, he grew in soil and I grew hydroponically. And some people always ask me, like, why don't you do that? Why don't you grow in the soil? And the truth was, I couldn't afford to. I couldn't afford to take the time to learn the skills to make the switch in order to be able to grow organically. And so when I hear people talking in the States about this whole make America healthy again and, let's get rid of glyphosate and let's get rid of all these things. I get it. In an ideological world, that would be amazing. But reality is if we just in one foul swoop said no Roundup next year, we would have less food production because the farmers don't know how to do it. And we wouldn't have the food and the farmers would go bankrupt. We've gotten ourselves into this big system, which I'm going to speak to a little bit later on, is we're in this big system and this big monster really. And there's not a fast way out of it. It's not just as simple as don't spray Roundup next year. Because that's not going to work for any level of agriculture whatsoever. Do you remember the toilet paper wars of 2020? Are you worried about being prepared in an emergency? Are you tired of being a slave to the corporations we purchase from? It's time to take control. Become ungovernable. Take your food system into your own hands. Hi, I'm Dawn, a coach dedicated to helping you live like grandma used to. Self-reliant, resourceful, and prepared. Whether it's raising chickens, growing a garden, canning your own food, or even milking a cow, I'll teach you how to thrive and survive in the space you have, big or small. We can even potentially make some money off your homestead. Visit Dawn's Dirt today to book your free jumpstart call. Together, as a team, we can get you self-reliant and ungovernable. We, the people, have the power to take back control. Remember, If you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. Let's build a better future and a community, one skill set at a time. So people are throwing around this word regenerative farming, which I tended to be a bit more like that. I was a bit more of a hippie farmer. I liked doing things on the organics level a bit more as far as fungicide and insecticide goes, for sure. But sometimes I just did what I had to do. So I never sprayed my crops with anything I shouldn't, because I'm not like that. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have to tell my customers that I did that. And I always viewed it's my job to tell the truth and your job to make informed decisions. And I just didn't want to have to do that. So I use the organic methods more as far as those things go. But yeah, regenerative agriculture is great if you can do it. And that's the thing. It takes years of practice. It takes years of trial and error. It takes years of building your soil and doing it different ways. I think that we should, and we will see more regenerative farmers coming up in society and in life. It's good. Again, I understand why a farmer does what he has to do for his crops and for his farm. In some cases, people are 5th and 6th generation family farms. You don't want to be the one that loses the family farm. That would be just a black mark on your, family tree. So you're going to do what you need to do for your farm. I mean, that's even what I did by selling my farm, as I did what I needed to do for my farm. And the ultimate thing was to sell it so that I could have something of a legacy left for my children. And so in regenerative farming, you need less inputs, which is great. So the long game is better, but the short term, you're going to lose a bit of production to get to that long-term goal. And I was listening to a podcast this morning. It was a really good one. He was brilliant. And he was talking about his regenerative farm and how he mixes his grains and he has different crops, and he was getting 90 bushels to the acre in grain crops that he mixes, and how his soil health is really high, and how he first grazes his hayland, and then he goes through and hays his hayland later on in the season. Brilliant, honestly. He's kind of behind the times in many ways, and then also ahead of the times in many ways in where I think farming needs to go. And so what we've seen is a farming trend where you have to get bigger. And so that's part of my issue as well. I'm very transparent. So my greenhouse at 36,000 square feet was too big for the small industry, the farmers market industry. And we'll get into farmers markets later on, quote unquote farmers markets. My greenhouse was actually too big for that to just be in that industry and that sales bracket. My greenhouse was too small for the big greenhouse industry. And so hindsight 2020, what we should have done is we should have had our first and second year, and then we should have been aggressively adding on to the greenhouse. So just like if someone has a quarter section of land, they were going to want to, and if they're a grain farmer, they're going to want to buy the second section of land and the third section of land and the fourth section of land, because you have to grow in order to survive in the wholesale market. In that wholesale big system, you have to do it that way. You have to grow and you have to pivot and you have to get bigger in order to survive. Or you can do like I did, and I got into farmers markets. So I was cutting out all the middle guys, the grocery stores, the warehouses, anyone that could take $1 out of the farm. I cut them out and I sold my produce directly to consumers. And so that cut out all the middle guys, which puts more dollars back into my pocket. And that's, I think, the way we need to go in agriculture. We need to actually take a step back and we need to look at and reevaluate our system and think, where are we headed with our food system? So when it comes to my farm, bureaucracy hit hard. And I'll share a little story. So I've been calling our food system out for about 10 years now. In the name of health and safety or whatever it was, we used to sell direct from our farm to the grocery stores. And one year the grocery stores decided that we needed Canada GAP certification, which is it's a bureaucratic check and balance to know that our produce that we were growing on our farm was good for grocery stores. And I was arguing with the grocery stores and even right up into head office and saying, like, if there was an issue with my produce, I'm a small enough farmer that it will be found out really quick and easy. So if I made people sick, it would be in this grocery store, this grocery store, this grocery store, and these handful of markets, and you'd find me pretty fast. Now, the bureaucracy makes sense when you're taking potatoes from Prince Edward Island on the other side of Canada and you are spreading those potatoes through the grocery system right across Canada. Then you want some traceability. Then you want some checks and balances. Then you want to know, all the different things with your food. But why do we need that bureaucracy with the small system? And that's the problem, is we get into this government bureaucratic big corporation bureaucracy of the checks and balances that they need to be able to grow food. And we've kind of become, I feel like, a slave to that system, and it's all done in the name of health and safety. So who can argue with that? Oh, well, we're just trying to make it more healthy and more safety and more health and safety, more health and safety. Take raw dairy. So raw dairy is a big thing here in Canada. So back in the day when I was growing up, my grandparents had a dairy farm. We went out, worked on the dairy farm, got the milk from the bulk tank, brought it in the house, brought some of it home. That's the milk I grew up on and was raised on. And I loved it. I loved that milk. My tummies never were upset. I never, it worked well with our system. Even when we moved away, or we were always living away, but even when we couldn't get to my grandparents' farm, we would go down the road to the neighbor's dairy farm, go to their bulk tank, buy some of their milk and take it home and drink it. And so that was just normal, common practice. And if you're listening today and thinking like, yeah, I grew up like that, but so many people haven't anymore. And the reason is they decided that we need this thing called pasteurization. Now, pasteurization, again, makes sense if you're taking milk from hundreds of dairy farms, or there's less dairy farms now because they're having to get bigger and bigger and bigger to compete to even make ends meet. So even the dairy system with the quota system and all of that, they're just they're doing what they've got to do to make their farms survive. It makes sense that when you're taking milk from hundreds of different cows in a day, putting it all in a bulk tank, and then that milk's fine. That's the milk I actually want to drink in many ways, or I want to have my own cows one day, potentially. But yeah, so that milk is good. There's nothing wrong with what the dairy farmers are doing. It's a bigger system, but really at the end of the day, it's what they fed their cows, what comes out of them and in the bulk tank. Now, the real issue is when that milk leaves the dairy farm, it travels in a truck down to a warehouse, put through and mixed off with then tens of thousands of cows worth of milk, and then it's pasteurized and homogenized and bottled and all these things subtracted from it and added to it, and by the time we get the product on the other end, it's hardly even real milk anymore. It's not the farmer's fault. That's why I'm here doing this podcast today. Actually, it's not the farmer's fault. The farmer is doing what they need to do for their farm to make it survive. I don't fault the farmer for that. But by the time it leaves the farm and gets processed and gets to the customer's shelf, however many weeks later, it's a completely different product. It's not the same milk that you would have drank out of that bulk tank fresh. And so raw dairy has gotten a bad rap. And so where it all started was the dairy farmers, like back in the day, you had a few cows. Every farmer had a few cows. They had a couple of jugs of milk. They brought their milk to town fresh. You drank it within a day or two, and then you did the cycle over again. But then as these cities started getting bigger, and we can see it in society, we've got these massive, massive cities, and we've had to feed these massive, massive cities. And so what's the easiest way to do that? Get these farms bigger. And so these farms ended up being more of like a factory farm, and they had the farms outside of the city, but the transportation was a bit of an issue. So then they started doing factory farms inside the city. Well, where was everybody putting their chamber pots of whatever was in the chamber pot? Out the window, Where did that chamber pot stuff go? Down the road. Where was the farm? Down the road. What were the cows drinking? Down the road. So, then you get into bacteria issues and, things like that. So then, yeah, it makes sense why you'd want to pasteurize your milk. And raw dairy, is a big thing right now. And you just want to make sure it's from a clean dairy. Where the problems come in is when the dairy farmer is not being clean enough. And so if your milk has been handled properly, cooled quickly, it's not going to rot. It's actually going to separate and you'll get curds and whey, and it's still a decent product. Even at the end, you'll have cheese. But the problem is when it's not handled properly, that when you get bacteria in there and things start growing and things start festering, I heard of someone who had a bottle of raw dairy, and in the bottom, there was just basically some shit at the bottom of her bottle. And yeah, she got sick. And so when you get into those things, it's a bit trickier, but I don't think we need the government regulations to come in and deal with it all. I think we need some common sense, and we, the people, can just deal with this ourselves, like maybe don't buy milk from that dairy farmer, right? I think the problem is we've tried to make so many rules and regulations. We've got so many people in cities, and back to the whole thing with this grocery store, I didn't end up getting my Canada Gap certification because it would cost me $7,000 to get it, to be able to sell $20,000 worth of wholesale product to these stores. It just didn't financially make sense. And so I said, no, thank you. And I pulled out of the system. And that's the problem. The problem is the system. The problem is we're forcing farmers and we're forcing people to get into this system. And the more rules we make, the more government gets involved, the more bureaucracy we have, the more rules there are, and we're chasing our tails and we're building this big monster. And I said it back then, I said, just wait, we're going to have a monopoly on our food system, and we're only going to have these big farmers left. And then we're not going to have any small farmers left. I've been calling it out for 10 years in the name of health and safety or whatever. We're not going to have a small farmer left. And where does that lead us? That actually leaves us with a dictatorship in our food system. And that's not what I want. Can you imagine, just a few people controlling the food of all of us? And we're almost there. That's the thing. I think that's why this whole homesteading movement is becoming such a big thing, is because we're seeing that we're losing the skills that grandma and grandpa used to have. And so, yeah, in the name of health and safety and in the name of bureaucracy, we're seeing our system just turn into this one big wild monster. And, yeah, we're slaves to it, really. So here's the thing. It takes money to make money. And so our governments are an institution in themselves, and they have to tax us in order to make their money, to make their institutions work. And how do they make their institutions work? They make more bureaucracy. And so that's a system that we can't control. I mean, sure, I can go vote, but really, what does my vote do? Probably not a lot. And so we can't control that system. We can't control what the governments are doing. We can't control what bureaucracy they're trying to do. We can't control the rules and regulations and whatever. We could fight them, but that's not going to get us anywhere. We could protest them, but they shut down your bank accounts, so there's no point in protesting. We can try and make changes and send a petition, but that usually falls on deaf ears, and who's being paid by who. And really, it doesn't work anyway. We the people, the average person, if you're just listening to this, and even if you're a small farmer, a big farmer, a homesteader, or tinfoil hatter or not tinfoil hatter, really, at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat. We can't control the monster called government and the monster called money. Power and money make people do crazy things. And yeah, so that's where I'm at, is we, the people, actually have the power and control. We, the people, can change our food system, and we, the people, can make the changes and be the change within our communities. Personally, I don't want or need or like the government. If I really needed something, I mean, yeah, we've got some roads, and sure, we've got some really, we're in Canada, piss poor healthcare at this moment. And sure, it's free, quote unquote, but again, in Canada right now, our food system is one of the most regulated food systems in all of the world, really. Yeah, it's actually quite insane to me. You can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, and there's this board and that board and this government body and that government body and this rule and that rule and this regulation and that regulation, and you can't do this and you can do that, and you should do this and you shouldn't do that. It's so regulated. And really, like back 100 years ago, do you want to know how many food regulations there were? None. You raised your food, you knew a farmer, you got some food, you cooked your food, and you ate your food. And so, yeah, it's our system, I think, that is causing more problems with our food system and the bureaucracy than the food itself. I'm getting some chickens. I'm getting some chicks tomorrow, actually, and I've got 200 meat birds coming, and I'm trying to debate on what I'm going to feed them, because, do I feed them organics? Do I get the medicated chick starter? Do I not get the medicated chick starter? Do I do this? Do I do that? There's so many options, and at the end of the day, I'm going to do what's going to work best for me and my farm and my situation and my customers, and what's going to work best for my bottom line, really. Because again, at the end of the day, if I don't if I don't at least break even or make a little money on this, what's the point in even doing it? Why would I even bother farming? Like, honestly, other than I want food for my kids, but why would I even bother doing it for anyone else? The point is, no matter what you do at the end of the day, whether you fed organic feed or conventional feed, medicated chick starter, even had a vaccination in your chick. Yep, I said it. Even if you got your chicks vaccinated, mine won't be. But even if you did, whatever the choice is, you're still raising a bird, a healthy bird that you're going to cook as a cooked chicken. And that chicken is going to be a better choice, a better food choice, no matter which way you slice or dice it, than the box of Kraft dinner on the grocery store shelf. So at the end of the day, whatever choice you're making with your food and your farmers, ideological or not ideological, the best food for you is the food that's going to be from the farm to the table into your belly. It's still a way better choice than the processed bullshit that we've got going on with our food system. It's really quite sad. So let me explain a little bit about the grocery system. So what's happened with our food system back in the day? So back when I was growing up, I was a cucumber farmer. My parents were cucumber farmers. So they would pick their cucumbers, they would wrap them in the wrap machine. Yes, you have to put plastic wrap on cucumbers, because if you don't, they're a limp noodle within 2 hours or 3 hours because they lose their moisture. So yes, long English cucumbers grown in a greenhouse need plastic wrap, and that's why. So they would pick their cucumbers and they would ship them to the warehouse the next day, which is actually a bit faster than some of the bigger greenhouses. They get picked, they get brought to the packing warehouse, they get packed, the next day, and a day or two later, they are shipped from the packing house to the warehouse. And so there's different warehouses, and so they'll go to one warehouse and they might even go to another warehouse. And every time a piece of food is changing hands or changing locations, dollars are added to it. And so margin is added to it. So if you think about it, like my parents got $7 a dozen at the warehouse for their long English cucumbers back in the day. When we got into it, 20 years later, it was still around $7 a dozen. Like, the price of food hasn't gone up, which is why we see all these farmers getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because they just have to do more and more and more to even make a profit, to even make $5 at the end of the day to put in their pocket. And so that's why we're seeing bigger and bigger farmers and not smaller and smaller farmers, unless you switch out the system and go direct to customer. But yeah, so then they go from the warehouse to the grocery store to the consumer in their fridge, and then a few days later they eat that food. So the food that we're getting in a grocery store, even the fresh food, best case, that food is a week old. Whereas when I had my food from my farm, I brought it to the farmer's market and I sold it to customers. So that food was barely a day or 2 days old. And sometimes we'd be picking that morning and bringing it to farmers markets that afternoon, like that fresh. And when you grow it in your backyard, it's even fresher. So that's our food system. Our food system has turned into this big monster that we just have to feed into. And what choice do you have? I mean, if you live in the middle of the city, you can't have a cow. And so you either have to know your farmer, which we need to get back to that, because if we don't, we're going to lose our farmers. That's exactly what happened to me. Let me tell you about farmers, quote unquote, farmers markets. Farmers markets are not necessarily farmers markets. What's been happening in our farmers market industry is people have realized that there's money to be made in the farmers market industry. And so you have all these big vendors, these big vegetable and fruit vendors, and they are buying food either from another farmer to sell at the farmer's market. But again, money's being stacked on and exchanged, and profits are being made. Or even what was happening to me is I was competing at farmers markets against produce that was being bought and sold from the packing facility warehouse in the province of Alberta and being sold as farm direct. And I got told, tough luck, that's your competition. It was being bought and sold for less money than what I could grow and sell my vegetables for. I'm sorry, that's not a farmer's market. They don't care about the fucking farmer. They care about the bottom line, and they care about, I don't know. Anyways, that's my rant. I will rant until the day I die. So we need to protect our farmers. We need to protect our farmers at farmers markets. We need to actually have real farmers markets, real farm to table markets. Here's a little tidbit of information in the produce world. 1 to 2 acres of garden services 1 farmers market day. So I had 20 acres of garden plus a 36,000 square foot greenhouse, and I did 13 to 15 market days in a week. So if someone says that they have 10 acres of garden, the amount of produce, just the garden produce, so that's not cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers in a greenhouse, just that garden produce would actually only be enough for about 8 to 10 markets in a week. So if someone says they have 20 acres of garden, and you would think, wow, that's a lot of garden. Yeah, it will service 20 farmers markets day with one truck. One farmers market day is one farmers market. So if you do 3 farmers markets in one day, that counts as 3. So if you're doing 40 or 50 farmers markets in a week, you should have 80 acres of garden. But if anything less than that, liar, liar, pants on fire. So yeah, so you just got to really be careful and know your farmer. I was competing against, produce that was being bought and sold. So that adds to again, if we really care about where our food comes from, and if we really care about the small farmer, we're going to protect them, and we're going to, protect them against things like that. The lies and the bureaucracy even fell into the farmers markets, and we were fighting against it. Yeah, I'm digressing. I could talk for hours on this subject. So back to the food system. I think we're seeing a push right now. You can see it with the millennials and the whole sourdough bread thing. So, get your wife some sourdough bread and she's going to want chickens. And if she gets chickens, she's going to want the homestead, and she's going to want the cow, and she's going to want the pigs, and she's going to want everything. And so, which is great. I think that's good because, I was talking to my 96-year-old grandmother. She had a dairy farm. And I said, Grandma, what did you buy for groceries back in the day when you had the farm? And she said, some flour and some sugar and some salt and, maybe a piece of fruit, oranges or apples or something that they didn't grow on their farm. Well, they had crab apples, but maybe some oranges or a peach because we were in Alberta and we didn't have peaches. And so, yeah, she just bought a few things like that at the grocery store. But for the most part, they ate what they grew and what they raised. So they had dairy, they had meat because they had cows. They had my grandmother had the biggest garden you'd ever see. And we'd go there for a week. We'd go to grandma's house for a week, and we all loved it. But you go to grandma's house for a week and you got put to work shelling peas and, cutting beans and doing all the things. So grandma put you to work all the time, which was great. It was a great way to grow up. It was a great way to learn where your food comes from. I knew that the carrot came out of the ground and that it didn't come out of a grocery store shelf. And unfortunately, in the cities, we see that all too often, is that kids just don't even know where their food comes from. We need to make those connections back. And then we need to take our food system back into our own hands. And so I would like to see our small farmers and even the big small farmers, let's get back into the way it used to be. Let's start changing our food system. Let's stop the government bureaucracy. Let's start finding creative ways to work within the system. We can't fight the system. We can't protest the system. So we have to work alongside the system. We need to create parallel systems, and we need to find ways to be creative to get more food into our communities. We, the people, actually have the power to change things. We, the people, can change the way we do food. Back in the day, so raw dairy being sold in Canada is a taboo subject. You can't do it. And back in the day, I could name off, back 10 years ago, I could name off one person, and I will go to jail or die before I give up names, just so you know. I could name off one person that I knew that was doing dairy in a creative way. It's more of a gray area than a black or white area. And now, as of today, I probably could name off 15 people. I will cut my own tongue out before I tattle on these people, and they're doing it alongside the system. They're doing it outside the system, but alongside the system. And so that's what we need more of, is we need more people rebelling, I guess, and saying, we don't want your system. We are consenting adults. We are consenting families. We are consenting our bodies, our choice, and we're going to do things differently. And so for myself, if I want raw dairy, that's what I want to put in my body. That's what I'd rather spend my dollars on. Is it a little more money? Yep, it sure is. But is it better for you? I think so. An interesting fact, my children, 2 of my children can't have dairy. Sometimes they get upset to stomachs, but they get some raw dairy and boom, they can eat the pizza again because it just kind of resets their stomach. So tell me the science on that. I don't know, but it's the truth. It's what's going on in their bodies. Their stomachs can handle it a bit better. We, the people, can have freedom of choice. Freedom means freedom for everybody. And so I guess I'd like to touch on that too. It's freedom of choice. So if I want to have French fries that were fried in beef tallow as opposed to canola oil, that's my freedom of choice. Now, if a farmer wants to grow canola oil or canola on his cropland, I don't fault him for that. I actually understand and even support why he does it. Like, do I eat canola oil? No, it's not a choice that I make, but do I fault that farmer? Absolutely not. I do not. It's the freedom of choice. I think that's where it comes back to is if you believe in freedom. So if you're one of these freedom fighters and you were the trucker and you went for freedom, yeah, I was right with you. I believe the same things. I believe in freedom, but it can also be taken too far. And so it's the freedom of choice for all. So if you believe in freedom, you have to believe in freedom for all. So freedom of religion, freedom of political viewpoints, freedom of food choices you put in your body, freedom of drug choices that you put in your body, freedom for everything. And so even when it comes down to like the trans issue, like it's maybe not what I would choose, but I still love and can be kind and compassionate to people. Don't be a dick, like don't be unkind. So as much as I would like freedom of religion, I'm a Jesus follower, I believe in freedom for other people as well. And so when it comes down to that, I want to be free to put the food into my body that I choose. And so if that means I go through the McDonald's drive-through and get some McDonald's, I want the freedom to be able to do that. And if that means I put, fresh raw milk into my body, I want the freedom to be able to do that as well. So, if we just get back to some common sense, you pull the bottle of milk out of the fridge and you sniff it. And if it smells bad, you don't drink it. And if it smells good, you drink it. If it tastes bad, you don't drink it. Like we need to get back to some common sense. And especially with our food system. So that's the thing. We, the people, have freedom and autonomy to put into our bodies what we want to do. And same thing with farmers. If a farmer wants to put some Roundup on his cropland, I think he should have the freedom to do that. I'm not going to say to him, don't do that. I understand why he's doing it. He's just doing it, honestly, to make his farm work. He's just trying to do what he needs to do to pay the bills, just as we all are. So let's stop, being so hard on one another. And, even during COVID with the whole vaccine thing, well, some people had to take it and they said, oh, it's free. You didn't have to take it, but some people had to take it in order to keep their jobs. It was their job, which was their paycheck and on their livelihood. And if they didn't do it, then they lose their way of making money. The love of money is the root of all evil. That's biblical. And so, yeah, when we see these bureaucracies, when we see the governments, taxation, and we're getting to slavery really now, and when we're seeing all these things, it's the love of money, the love of power, and the love of control that are causing these issues. We, the people, can make the change and bring the system back down to ourselves and make changes for ourselves. And so where does that start? That starts with a seed. And so when you plant a seed, whatever it might be, and I think this is my opinion, but I think everyone should have a garden or a plant growing in their living room window that they can cut some lettuce off and make a salad in their own freaking kitchen. So if we all become farmers, quote unquote farmers, on a very small scale, everyone should grow vegetables or something, produce something in their own space that they have. And so a package of seed costs you what, $2? And if you can get it to grow and produce food, that food, if you were to go and buy it in the grocery store, is probably worth $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $80. Like it depends on what the item is. And so, yeah, when it comes to becoming self-reliant, we, the people, should be growing gardens in our backyards. Becoming self-reliant as well is looking into different creative systems. So I'm part of a company or a part of a group called Barter Pay. And so what that is you take your extra items and you sell them online for barter credits, and then you can purchase things with your barter credits. And so it's just a little different system. And I used to have it at the farmer's market all the time. If there was something that I wanted at a farmer's market, or if vendors, they had something that I wanted, I traded vegetables for them. It was a whole different subsystem that worked outside of the regular system. And so we need to be creative and get into other things like that. How can we barter and trade, and what can we do to make our system different? And we don't need our governments to interfere with that. I feel like we need less government control than more government control. So the government just wants to put their hands in your pocket to take what they feel is theirs, to allot it however they feel that they need to. And maybe that's not the way I want to do it. If we were really doing what we need to do in our communities and in societies, we actually wouldn't need these big governments. I think we need less governments and we need more community. We need more people just rubbing shoulders with people, coming together, helping people, oh, you're hungry, here's some food, like that's what we need to get back to is our small community system. So food is a fundamental need and a right. We should be allowed to just get the food we want and need to eat. We should be allowed to choose to eat the craft dinner. Should we? No. But should we have the choice for it? Yes. We should be allowed to eat McDonald's if we want to, if it's available. Yeah, it's there. But we also should be able to get the food that we want from our friends and neighbors. And if we want food with less pesticide on it, like my customers demanded I grow my food without pesticide unless certified organic product was used. So that's exactly what I did. I did what my customers wanted. And so again, it comes to choice. We, the people, can vote with our dollars. And so the more we vote with our dollars and buy the food straight from the farmers, the less bureaucracy we're going to get in the system. And so, yeah, just remember that when you're buying your food. And I can tell you from experience and from the way I grew up, the food that was on the farm was just the best food. It tasted the best. It was grown the best. It was the most natural. I mean, people were just so much healthier because they ate what they had. They ate seasonally. They ate clean. They just, it was just a better food system instead of this monster that we've created. And part of that is because of our cities. And so, yeah, we've got to figure out ways to just get back to the farmers farming and bringing it to the cities and the towns and the people just eating that. And instead of this globalist food system that we got going on. I'm just saying if we got back to our local food system, we'd have less of these problems. And we need to bring it back to community, rubbing shoulders with one another, putting our cell phones down, and just getting back to community and doing life with one another. I've been saying for a long time now, he who controls the food controls the people. With this system, and again, I've been calling it out for about 10 years now. It's easy to see how it eventually can be about control. We saw it during COVID, during the lockdowns that, yes, we were still allowed to go get groceries. They didn't take that away from us. But if you didn't get vaccinated, you weren't allowed to go into a restaurant. You weren't allowed to, do this or do that or get on an airplane or do lots of different things. At what point do we have this food system where it's just a few farmers or a few handful of, farmers left? And I've been saying this too. Farm Credit Canada owns most of the mortgages on most of the farms or many of the farms. And what will we do if they say you need to do this with your farm or we're going to call your loan? Well, the farmers are going to have to do it, right? And so it's about control. And so the bigger this system and this monster gets in our food system, the more control it's going to take, and the scarier it is. That's really important to just know where your food comes from. I mean, I'm not trying to put the fear in people. I don't feel like we need to fear anything. I don't think we need to fear our governments. We just need to make the changes amongst us and be the change. Don't fear the government. Just be the change. That's all. So I heard this quote today and I thought it was really good. You can't fix a broken system with the people who broke it. And so that's why, again, we need to get into a parallel system. We need to get into a side system. We need to get into the gray areas and the wading into the different areas of how can we change the system for ourselves? We can't control the government. The government's not going to change. They're going to do what they do. And I don't trust them. I don't trust the power and money and the corruption that's going on. But yeah, so if we can't fix that system and we can't, do anything with that system, they always say, get out and vote. And I say, do. I mean, go cast your ballot. And those people are not the ones, they're the ones breaking the system. They're the ones putting more rules and regulations and bureaucracy and all the things on that's wrecking our food system than, the food system itself. And the farmers are not the problem. Like I said earlier on in this episode, the farmers are not the problem. The farmers are not the problem. I support all the farmers. So here we'll bring it back to what can you do? Well, you can be the change. You can start your own garden in your own backyard. You can grow something in your windowsill. You can buy a couple of acres of property and raise a couple of chickens. We need to get more small farmers and more small producers on the land, growing the food and feeding the people. And the more we do that and the more we brush end to end with our communities, the better off our food system will be. And so if you're in a high-rise apartment building, I have a challenge for you. Get a hold of me. Every balcony in that building should be growing something. And then once a week, you pick your items and you go down to the lobby and you barter and trade amongst yourself. Can you imagine how much money you'll save on your food costs if you all did that? So start small and build your community. Your community is your people. So I was just on a podcast just before this. I was recording with someone else, and she was saying that her grandmother had a big backyard and it was full of garden vegetables. That's how she spent her summer. And that was a city lot in town. And so if you have a backyard, get in touch with me. Let's build your backyard into a garden. And you know what? You can feed not only yourselves, but you can feed your neighbors. You can feed your children. This lady's grandma fed her kids and then her grandkids. And you can grow so much food just in a backyard. We just need to get back to that. We need to get back to the basics. We need to do it like grandma did it 100 years ago. And so, yeah, that's what you can do. If you're buying a homestead, know your numbers. It is a business. And so you have to know your numbers. What's it going to cost you versus what you're going to make? And that's really, really, really important. And so know your numbers, know your numbers. How are you going to make money and how are you going to save money? And if you need help with that, reach out to me. I'm a homestead coach. I walk people through this. I've got clients right across Canada right now. I can take clients on in the States or really right around the world because the principles are the same. How do you grow and raise food for people, for your friends, for your neighbors, and for your community? And do it one small thing at a time. Bite off one small thing at a time. So just start with some lettuce on your balcony, do one thing and do it well. And then, you can grow and raise food for your friends and neighbors and family. And that's the way our food system needs to go back to, where we rub shoulders with the people that raise our food. And so thanks so much for listening to me today. Let me know what you think and how this episode was. But I went off my notes, but I mostly went off my heart and off my head and just told it like it is. And so, I support agriculture, big, small, up, down, sideways. I understand why the big farmers do what they do. I understand why the small farmers do what they do. And we just need to get farming back from the 1% or 1 to 3% here in Canada. We need to get more farmers. Everyone was a farmer back in the day, and so everyone should have a farm or something in their backyard again. Thanks for listening to me. Tune in next time to Dawn's Dirt.